Governor Richardson appointed Reed Dasenbrock Cabinet Secretary of Higher Ed in May of 2007. Since then, drawing on his 27 years of experience in New Mexico higher education, he is working to expand educational access for all New Mexicans in order to prepare them for the knowledge-based economy of the 21st century. He is passionately committed to P-12 education and public education and higher ed partnerships. And I can tell you it's been a tremendous pleasure working with him and partnering with him on numerous initiatives, of which Ideal New Mexico, I believe, is the crown jewel of our partnership. So without further ado, help me welcome New Mexico Higher Ed Secretary, Dr. Reed Dasenbrock.
I have a running battle with my son about having a phone book in his apartment. Every time I go, he lives in Baltimore. He graduated from Las Cruces High in 2001, so he is a proud product of New Mexico public education. He's in medical school, and so every time I go, I need to call something, and I say, well, where's your phone book? And he says, phone book? How 19th century of you is a phone book? I point out the phone, it's sort of 20th century, not 19th century. But he absolutely refuses to have a phone book, and actually he says so on good ecological grounds. He's much greener not to have a phone book. And if you read the wonderful story in Las Cruces about the person that had 3 storage lockers full of phone books, that's an example of that. But I think that's an image of what we're, in a sense, facing today in terms of higher education and how Ideal contributes to that. We are very slow to change in higher education. It's said to be easier to change the course of history than it is to change the history course. And we know that we are deeply medieval institutions. I like to say graduation speeches that we wear the robes we wear not because we're Harry Potter fans, but rather because we come from the same medieval world that Harry Potter comes from. So we don't change very quickly, and yet, if you know young people, the way they learn is changing very, very quickly. We regard email as sort of a fairly new invention, and in any case, convenience. Well, they regard email as a way to communicate with old people. All right, that's us, by the way. Old people, I think, reaches about 28, so I think that's almost everyone in the room. And so how they are learning, from accessing phone numbers to buying books. Why go to a bookstore when you go to Amazon.com? They don't know what an 800 number is. They, of course, go online. All the ways in which information is accessed, but also I think learning takes place, is changing very, very rapidly. And so what I like to call the scene of learning has to change very radically in this situation. Now, that doesn't transform everything, right? Think of how quickly learning changed with the invention of printing. Right? You could now have a textbook. You couldn't have a textbook in 1200. All right? You can have a textbook. You can have the textbook industry. And yet we still have formal classrooms. So a lot will remain. All right? So those of us who really don't want to change, we can go on doing some of what we like to do. But obviously, much of the way people learn, and therefore much of how education has to be organized, will change. And Ideal, I think, is a model of the direction in which we're changing. And I would say several things about it. One is the kind of horizontal differences in space are going to be eliminated very, very quickly. So the students in Fort Sumner or Capitan or Mora will have the same access to higher education as people in bigger high schools. So that kind of difference, which is a major issue, all right, because rural New Mexico needs education in the same way that urban New Mexico does. So those kinds of distances are going to disappear, but also distances among levels. And so the primary rollout of Ideal to this point has been high school to high school, in a sense creating a virtual school in the state. But what is unique about it, right? Chairman Miera, we asked last week, well, what's exactly unique? You're always saying Ideal is unique, right? So what's unique about this? What's unique is not simply that it is a K-12 or a public school virtual school, but the integration of other kinds of levels. And so in addition to dual credit, in which you can take face-to-face classes in every school district in the state, we are going to be able to offer dual credit online. And that's going to be an enormous simplification for the superintendents because there are 25 institutions of higher education the state can provide dual credit. There are 89 school districts. That leaves only slightly more than 2,000 possible arrangements. All right? Now that's a nightmare for anyone to think about. We can have one arrangement. Ideal can be the provider. or the broker, or the structure, call it what you want for online dual education, dual credit, and that's extremely important. Simultaneously, we're working on getting school districts and higher ed to get together as one order of difficulty. There's a whole other order of difficulty getting higher education institutions to cooperate. That's my job, all right? That's why I have a lot more white hair than I did, a year ago. But no, seriously, we're working on getting essentially all online courses taught in New Mexico transportable, so that the student does not have to re-enroll in another university. The student can take a course taught by the great programs in Mexico State that Carmen Gonzalez runs if he or she is enrolled in another campus. So we're calling this Internet Course Exchange, and we're working on that very hard as well. Finally, in time, we will have training for state agencies online. One of the things that we're working on in the higher education department is how do we promote higher education among state employees, including our own. There's a lot of training dollars, there's a lot of commitment to training. Well, if that training can aggregate to degrees, that's going to be better for all of us. So in all of these different dimensions, we are creating a new educational structure for the 21st century. Just the partnership between PED and HED, new structure, people say, well, wait a minute, how's it going? Well, it's going extremely well, I think. And so we are creating, I think, a new 21st century educational structure for a 21st century economy. And it's great to be here.